Welcome to another deep dive. Today we'll be exploring the mystical poetry of Rumi's Masnavi.
It's a world where poetry meets the soul.
Yeah, exactly. Now, for anyone who hasn't had a chance to encounter it before,
Yeah.
you can think of the Masnavi as this epic collection of poems and stories, all beautifully woven together by Rumi, this incredible 13th century Persian poet.
It's considered one of the cornerstones of Sufi literature.
And just glancing through these passages you've shared with me, I'm already seeing these grand themes. Love the search for enlightenment, this interplay between reason and intuition.
It's pretty heady stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And what strikes me most is how Rumi doesn't present these ideas in this kind of dry, philosophical way.
Right.
He's this master of imagery and storytelling.
That's what makes him so captivating, I think.
Yeah, he bypasses your intellect and speaks directly to your heart. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, I think one of Rumi's central themes, and one that definitely appears a lot in these excerpts, is love.
Okay.
But be prepared, his definition might not be what you'd expect.
Now that's interesting. What did you find in Rumi's concept of love that was so unexpected?
Well, it's not about that fleeting romantic kind of love that we often think of.
Right.
Rumi's talking about this yearning for the divine, this force so powerful that it can just shatter your ego and lead to a complete transformation.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from the intensity of it.
No, he doesn't.
I mean, that quote, "Only he whose garment is rent by the violence of love is wholly pure from covetousness and sin." It's so vivid.
Absolutely. He uses this metaphor of sweet madness to describe love's power. It's this complete surrender, like being consumed by a fire, but a fire that purifies you.
I like that. And yet he also compares love to a physician. It makes me wonder if he's also saying that along with this ecstatic, consuming aspect, love also has this healing purpose.
That's a great observation. I think he sees love as something that can heal our pride and self-conceit.
Right.
It's like love exposes our flaws, not to shame us,
Right.
but to invite us to grow and evolve.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about bliss and surrender, but also about becoming a better version of ourselves. It makes you think about all the different ways love can operate in our lives.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another crucial idea in these excerpts, the path of self-annihilation.
Now, that sounds pretty daunting. What does he mean by that?
It's not about literal annihilation. Think of it more as letting go of your ego, that sense of I that separates you from something much greater.
Okay, so less about disappearing and more about dissolving the barriers between yourself and, well, everything else.
Exactly. Rumi believed that true enlightenment comes when you surrender that limited sense of self and merge with the divine.
So how does someone even begin to approach that? It's not like you just wake up one morning and poof, your ego's gone.
No, it's a process, for sure.
Yeah.
And Rumi uses stories to illustrate this concept. One that stands out is the tale of the Jewish king and his vizier.
Oh.
So this vizier, he's ambitious and cunning, and he sets this elaborate plan in motion to create division among the Christians. But it all backfires, spectacularly leading to his own downfall.
So his ego-driven motives ultimately lead to his ruin. That's a pretty clear message.
It is. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when we let our desires for power and recognition drive our actions.
It makes you wonder, how often are we making decisions based on our egos? Even if we're not trying to manipulate entire kingdoms, how can we be more aware of that influence in our everyday lives?
That's the question I think Rumi is prompting us to ask.
Yeah.
How can we cultivate self-awareness and choose actions that are aligned with a higher purpose?
And speaking of purpose, another fascinating theme that I see popping up in these excerpts is this tension between trusting in God and relying on human effort.
It's a balance that Rumi explores beautifully. He doesn't advocate for blind faith.
Yeah, it's not about sitting back and just expecting miracles to happen.
Right. He encourages both trust in divine guidance and using our own intelligence and abilities. It's like that quote you mentioned earlier, trust in God, yet tie the camel's leg.
Right. What do you make of that?
What do you think?
To me, it suggests that faith and action go hand in hand.
Ah.
We trust that a higher power is at work, but we also have to take practical steps.
Right.
Even if you believe in divine protection, you still look both ways before crossing the street.
Exactly. It's acknowledging that we have a role to play in shaping our destiny.
Yeah.
We're not just passive recipients of fate.
It's a powerful message, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and pressure to make things happen.
Right.
Maybe slowing down and remembering that balance is key.
I think that's a great takeaway.
Yeah.
And this leads us to another interesting point that Rumi makes. He sees the inner and outer world as reflections of each other,
Okay.
constantly influencing and shaping one another. It's like
Yeah.
this dance between the material and spiritual realms.
That makes me think of that saying, as within, so without.
Right.
Like our inner state is projected outwards,
Right.
creating our reality.
Exactly. And Rumi uses this really interesting analogy to illustrate this. He talks about the animal and rational souls as husband and wife. The wife, representing the animal soul, is focused on material needs, the desires of the flesh,
Right.
while the husband, representing the rational soul, is more focused on God, on spiritual aspirations.
So it's like this constant push and pull between our earthly desires and our longing for something more.
Exactly. And it's through balancing these two forces, the material and the spiritual,
Right.
that we can achieve a sense of harmony and wholeness.
This reminds me of something I was struggling with recently. I was feeling so overwhelmed with all the shoulds in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Work deadlines, family obligations, trying to keep up with everything. It was really draining my energy,
Yeah.
leaving me with no space for my own spiritual practice.
It sounds like you were experiencing that imbalance that Rumi talks about.
Yeah, I think so.
But the fact that you recognized it is a huge step.
Yeah, I'm definitely still working on it. But reading these excerpts has really helped me see that it's not about neglecting one aspect for the other.
Right.
It's about finding a way to integrate them, to live a life that honors both my earthly and spiritual needs.
And that's where Rumi's idea of spiritual transformation comes in. He believes that through dedicated practice, we can elevate our consciousness and experience this profound shift in our being.
Okay, but what does that actually look like? I mean, are we talking about meditating for hours on end or renouncing all worldly possessions?
Not necessarily. Rumi uses powerful metaphors to illustrate this idea. For example, he compares bread to the food of the body and asks, how can it be the food of the soul?
Right.
What do you think he's getting at there?
It's like he's saying that just as our bodies need nourishment, our souls do too. But the kind of nourishment we need for our spirits goes beyond physical food.
Exactly. He's encouraging us to seek out experiences that feed our souls, things like meditation, prayer, acts of service, connecting with nature.
And it's about finding the practices that resonate with us individually, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely. He uses the example of Farhad carving a mountain for his beloved Shurin to illustrate the soul's potential to overcome obstacles.
Right.
It's about that unwavering dedication, that willingness to put in the effort to reach our spiritual goals.
That's a powerful image. It reminds me that even though transformation can be challenging, it's also incredibly inspiring.
And Rumi also emphasizes the importance of intention. He tells this story about a hypocrite who pretends to be drunk with love for God, but is actually full of deceit.
Right.
It highlights the need for sincerity in our spiritual practices.
So it's not about appearances or trying to impress others, but about cultivating a genuine connection with the divine. Our actions should reflect the purity of our intentions.
Right. And speaking of purity, there's another story that really got me thinking. It's about Muawiyah and Iblis.
Okay.
What's fascinating is that Iblis, traditionally seen as the embodiment of evil, argues that he's simply a mirror,
Okay.
reflecting the good and bad that already exists in the world.
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking perspective. It challenges our typical assumptions about good and evil.
Exactly. Iblis even claims that he played chess with God, and despite being checkmated, still experiences God's blessings.
So it raises questions about the nature of free will, divine will, and even the purpose of evil.
And maybe it's also about recognizing our own shadows, those darker aspects of ourselves that we might try to ignore or suppress. Do you think Rumi is suggesting that true spiritual growth involves acknowledging and integrating those parts of ourselves?
That makes a lot of sense. It's like trying to run from your shadow. It'll always be there. Maybe the key is to turn and face it, to understand it and integrate it into the wholeness of who we are.
It's about embracing all parts of ourselves, the light and the darkness, as part of our journey towards wholeness.
That's a powerful message. And I love how Rumi uses storytelling to convey these complex ideas.
He's a master storyteller, and he doesn't shy away from pushing the boundaries of our conventional thinking.
Like in that story where he challenges our ideas of good and bad, right and wrong.
Right.
I mean, the idea that even those seen as evil like Pharaoh or Iblis might have a role to play in the divine plan is pretty radical.
It definitely challenges our comfortable categories. But it seems that Rumi is urging us to move beyond our tendency to judge and instead cultivate a more compassionate and inclusive perspective.
It's like he's saying, don't get caught up in labels, look deeper.
Exactly. Remember the story where Moses is commanded by God to engage not in dissevering, but in uniting.
Right.
It's a call to see beyond surface appearances and recognize the inherent value in all beings.
And that leads to another point. He emphasizes focusing on the inner state of the heart rather than outward displays. It's like he's saying God doesn't care about empty rituals or fancy words.
Right. What matters is the sincerity of our devotion, the purity of our intentions. He uses the analogy of gifts between friends, suggesting they're simply outward expressions of a love that already exists.
So our spiritual practices shouldn't be about seeking external validation or reward, but about nurturing that inner connection with the divine.
Exactly. It's like the difference between going through the motions and truly living from a place of love and devotion.
But even with the purest intentions, it sounds like Rumi acknowledges that staying on this path is no easy feat. He compares lust to a snake that's constantly lurking, waiting to strike.
And he urges us to actively resist those temptations that pull us away from our spiritual goals. It's like a constant battle between our lower and higher selves.
And it seems like this inner battle is often mirrored in our outer world as well. He talks about how our encounters with others can serve as mirrors reflecting back to us our own strengths and weaknesses.
Remember the story of the youth who complains to the king about his rations?
Oh, yeah.
Instead of taking responsibility for his own situation, he blames external circumstances.
It's so easy to project our own insecurities and dissatisfaction onto others, isn't it? It's like we're trying to avoid looking at ourselves.
Exactly. But those moments of confrontation, both internal and external, are often the catalyst for growth.
It's like Rumi is saying, don't shy away from the challenges. They hold the keys to your transformation.
And that brings us to another profound insight. The idea that everything happens according to God's will.
Okay, but how do we reconcile that with free will? It can feel like a real paradox.
It's definitely something to contemplate. Rumi seems to suggest that even when we feel like we're in control, we're actually part of a much grander design.
He compares the heart to a feather in the desert blown about by the winds. It's a beautiful image, but also a little unsettling. Like, are we really just at the mercy of fate?
It might feel that way sometimes.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not about being powerless, but about surrendering to a wisdom that we can't always comprehend. Even in those moments of chaos or uncertainty,
Right.
there's a deeper order at work.
It's about trusting that there's a purpose, even if we can't see it in the moment.
Exactly. And that's where faith comes in. Even when things are tough, we can trust that a higher power is guiding us.
So it's not about passivity or resignation, but about actively choosing to trust, even when we don't understand.
And speaking of trust, one of the things that makes Rumi so relatable is how he weaves these teachings through stories and poetry.
Right.
He doesn't just talk about abstract concepts, he makes them come alive.
That's what makes him such a compelling teacher. He speaks to our hearts and imaginations.
One story that really captures this is the tale of the three princes searching for their beloved. It's like a metaphor for our own spiritual journeys.
Oh, I love that story. Each prince represents a different approach to the path. There's the impulsive one driven by passion who rushes into danger. Then there's the cautious one who relies on logic and strategy.
Right.
Then
The third prince, he's the enigmatic one, the one who seems to operate from a deeper intuition, trusting in a higher guidance, even when the path is unclear.
And it's that third prince who ultimately finds his beloved. It's like Rumi is saying that sometimes the most direct path is through surrender,
Right.
through trusting that something bigger is leading us.
It's a beautiful message. And it reminds us that the journey itself is just as important as the destination. It's about embracing the ups and downs, the moments of clarity and confusion as part of our spiritual evolution.
That makes me think about how often we get caught up in striving and trying to force things to happen. Maybe it's more about surrendering to the flow, trusting that the divine is unfolding within us every step of the way.
And this surrender isn't just about our inner lives. Rumi also emphasizes the importance of outward action, of living our spiritual truths in the real world.
So it's not enough to just meditate and contemplate. We have to put our insights into practice.
Exactly. He stresses that our action should be a reflection of our inner state. If we're truly connected to the divine, that connection should radiate outwards, influencing the way we interact with others and navigate the world around us.
That reminds me of the story about the Arab carrier and the scholar.
Oh, yeah.
The scholar is full of theoretical knowledge, but lacks practical wisdom. He's so focused on abstract concepts that he fails to see the simple solution to the Arab's problem.
It's a classic case of head versus heart. It highlights the importance of integrating knowledge with action. True wisdom involves putting our understanding into practice, using it to make a positive difference in the world.
It's like Rumi is saying, don't just talk the talk, walk the walk.
Exactly. And as we walk this path, we have to remember that we're all human, prone to making mistakes.
Yeah, nobody's perfect.
Rumi emphasizes that what's important is learning from our missteps. He highlights the power of forgiveness both towards others and ourselves.
It's so easy to get caught up in blame and resentment, holding on to grudges.
So Rumi reminds us that it only poisons our own hearts. True freedom comes from releasing that negativity and embracing compassion and understanding.
He even suggests that true spiritual strength lies in our ability to forgive. Like, the bigger your heart, the more you can let go of.
And that forgiveness should extend to ourselves too. We need to be gentle with ourselves, acknowledge our imperfections without judgment,
Right.
and embrace the journey of growth and transformation with open hearts.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be human, to mess up, to learn and to keep growing.
Exactly. And this is where Rumi's exploration of the relationship between reason and intuition comes in. He doesn't dismiss reason altogether, but he acknowledges that it has limits, especially when it comes to spiritual matters. There's a whole realm of experience that lies beyond the grasp of logic, a realm that can only be accessed through intuition, inspiration, a surrender to the unknown.
So it's like there's this whole other way of knowing, a deeper knowing that we can tap into
Right.
if we're willing to let go of our need to analyze and control everything.
Exactly. Rumi compares this to a horse of wood, silence.
Right.
Just as a wooden horse is useless on dry land, but essential for navigating the sea.
Right.
So, too, silence is the vehicle that carries us into the depths of spiritual experience.
That's a beautiful image. It makes me think about how much we value noise and busyness in our culture.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to create more space for silence, for listening to that inner voice that speaks through intuition and feeling.
I think that's a really important insight.
Yeah.
And it connects to another point. Rumi makes the importance of trusting our inner guidance. He seems to suggest that each of us has access to this divine spark, this inner compass that can guide us on our spiritual journey.
But how do we distinguish that inner voice from all the other noise in our heads, all the doubts, fears, and shoulds?
It takes practice, and it's not always easy. Rumi uses the analogy of birds with different feathers, each representing a unique soul with its own path. He's reminding us that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to spirituality.
Right.
We each have to find our own way,
Right.
trusting the wisdom that resides within us.
It's like we're all on this grand adventure, but each of us has our own set of clues to follow.
Exactly. And while it's important to trust that inner compass, Rumi also recognizes the value of seeking guidance from those who have traveled the path before us.
So it's not about going it alone, but about finding teachers or mentors who can offer support and wisdom.
Exactly. He compares spiritual teachers to stars that illuminate the path for those who are seeking. They're not meant to be worshipped or blindly followed,
Right.
but they can offer valuable insights and perspectives based on their own experiences.
And this brings up the role of community in spiritual growth. It seems like Rumi is suggesting that we're not meant to walk this path alone.
He uses the metaphor of a lively temple built by pious individuals to convey this idea. It's a space where people come together to share their journeys, offer support, learn from one another.
It's like we need that sense of belonging, that shared understanding to help us stay the course.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, that
Yeah.
we can learn and grow from each other's experiences.
You know, this reminds me of that story about the man who captures a bird and receives 3 pieces of wisdom in exchange for its freedom.
Oh, right.
The bird advises him, don't believe foolish assertions, don't grieve over the past, and don't cling to what is not meant for you.
Right.
It's like a little roadmap for navigating life's challenges.
Those are such powerful pieces of advice, and it
Yeah.
highlights that wisdom can come from unexpected sources. Even in the face of loss or disappointment, there's always an opportunity for learning and growth.
And one of the biggest lessons Rumi seems to be offering is the importance of detachment. It's about letting go of our attachments to material possessions, outcomes, and even our sense of self.
He suggests that true freedom comes from surrendering to the flow of life,
Right.
trusting that everything is unfolding as it should. The more we cling, the more we suffer.
And this brings us back to that idea of self-annihilation, which sounded so daunting at first.
Right.
Maybe it's not about obliterating ourselves, but about releasing our grip on that limited sense of self, allowing ourselves to merge with something much greater.
It's a process of letting go of everything we thought we were, all the labels, roles, and identities that we cling to,
Right.
and realizing that our true nature is boundless, interconnected with everything.
It's both terrifying and incredibly liberating at the same time. It's like stepping off a cliff and realizing you can fly.
And Rumi reminds us that this journey is full of paradoxes. He embraces contradictions,
Right.
suggesting that opposites are not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary aspects of a greater whole.
It's like how you can't have light without darkness or joy without sorrow. They coexist, and each one helps us appreciate the other.
Exactly. Rumi highlights the interplay between light and darkness, joy and sorrow, reason and intuition.
Right.
They're all part of the tapestry of existence, essential for our growth and understanding.
That reminds me of the story about Bayezid, the Sufi mystic, who experiences the state of divine madness.
Oh, yeah?
He makes these shocking statements claiming there's nothing within him but God. His disciples are horrified, thinking he's become a heretic.
But Bayezid's words, while unconventional, are expressing this state of complete union with the divine.
Right.
It's like he's dissolved into that ocean of being transcending the limitations of language and logic.
It's a reminder that sometimes spiritual experiences defy explanation, that we have to go beyond the confines of our minds to truly grasp them.
And that brings us to another important point, the importance of surrendering to the mystery.
Okay.
Rumi acknowledges that the human mind can't fully comprehend the nature of God or the workings of the spiritual realm.
Right.
There are things that logic simply can't grasp.
So it's about letting go of our need for certainty and control, trusting that even though we don't understand everything, there's a deeper wisdom at play.
Exactly. He invites us to embrace the unknown,
Right.
to trust that the divine is guiding us, even when the path ahead is unclear.
It's a reminder that faith is about taking that leap even when we can't see where we're going to land. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive into Rumi's Masnavi.
It's been an incredible journey exploring these powerful themes.
It's amazing how Rumi's words, written centuries ago, still resonate so deeply today. He speaks to that timeless longing within us, that yearning for connection, for meaning, for something that transcends the limitations of our everyday lives.
He's a guide companion on this path of spiritual discovery.
And as we conclude, I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Rumi. What you seek is seeking you. May those words inspire you to keep exploring, keep seeking, keep diving deep into the mysteries of your own heart and the wonders of the world around you.
Until next time, may your journey be filled with love, wisdom, and the joy of discovery.
And may you always remember that the hidden treasure you seek is already within you.